Hello, I am talking to you today about an article that comes from the International Journal for the Advancement of Counseling. That's an online publication, so you can actually search it and look at the article if you would like. The article's title is Theory and Practice of Positive Feminist Therapy, a culturally responsive approach to divorce therapy with Chinese women. I selected this article as it pertains to our ethics class for several reasons. It has tie-ins to, of course, multicultural counseling and counseling clients diverse from yourself. Tie-ins to competence, because this article really shows that there are many resources that are readily accessible and easily digestible for counselors to utilize. And it would be an excellent educational tool to use if you are counseling a client from this culture. We have Chapter 10, which deals with the application of a theory in an ethical manner and tailoring that theory to work with your client and within their parameters. This article is interesting because it has sort of a contrast, and it utilizes the contrast from the theories and the culture, brings them together, and then tailors the approach to the culture. And then also we have tie-ins with couples and families. And something that I learned in the course of reading this article is even if you are dealing with an individual therapy situation in the Chinese culture, so for the Chinese or Chinese American woman coming from a traditional culture, the importance of family and the others in her lives is so important that understanding the ethical issues involved in couples and families counseling will actually help you in counseling that individual because of the strong influence and presence that they have in her life. I'm going to go ahead and follow the course of the article more or less so that if you do look at it, this presentation will kind of aid you in getting a synopsis of the article, and so that if you are interested for any reason to read further after you see this presentation, you have that opportunity and kind of follow along. So the article gives us a little historical background, which is an awesome tool to understanding your client. And something that stood out to me was that these women are actually considered temporary members of their families of origin. So that daughter is really a transient member of that family and will become a member of the husband's family, a member of the in-laws family, and that's where her real membership lies, which is absolutely huge to consider when you're looking at this client and considering whether or not she would want to go ahead and proceed with a divorce. Because you and I may think, oh, I have a divorce. As a westernized person from an individualistic society in our tradition here in the United States, that's fine. I still have my family of origin. I still have my parents. I still have my siblings. But this would not be the case for this client. She would, in fact, be kind of solo. She wouldn't have the family she had created with her husband, the family of in-laws to which she was supposed to belong and to serve and respect and honor, nor her family of origin in which she was raised. The model that the authors present is a 5-phase model derived from positive feminist therapy. It has phases lined out in a cyclical manner so that actually you can kind of understand the relationship between the different topics of the phases and know that you're not necessarily trying to get from point A to point B to point C so much as cover the entire model and use it as help in decision making and then also action planning for the client. Phase 1, about where am I and how am I doing, is in regards to the client and why she has come to therapy today. Also, phase 2, how did I get here? This is where we have that cultural tie-in, and then you kind of understand what are the forces that are acting upon me, why am I here, what's going on in my relationship, and it's kind of an interesting phase, I think, because this phase really gives the opportunity for the counselor also to be educated about his or her client as she's reviewing this information from that client. Phase 3 is where do I want to go? So this is about goals for the client and maybe what decision she wants to make. Phase 4 is really a reflection on Phase 3. How am I feeling? And it is in regards to those goals that this client has set for herself. And Phase 5 is how do I get there? So now if I know what my goals are, what actions can I take and to actually achieve that goal from Phase 3. And so you see how it's not really arranged linearly, but always is referring back to other stages, and other stages are influencing the next stages. So we look at this model, And we consider the different types of therapy. And there are a couple of really interesting things that the authors caution us toward when dealing with this client that I think are unique. The client is someone that definitely benefits from informed consent, as all clients do. But we think of that as setting up sort of a trusting and egalitarian relationship. Partially true for this client. Yes, it does help empower the client. Yes, it does help in the decision making. Absolutely, we want to educate her as to what therapy means. Um, and we do want to collaborate from her as in find out her own desires. But at the same time, this client is not necessarily looking to you for an egalitarian relationship. Her concept of you is someone as an expert, someone as a guide, someone that will provide her advice. So here, even though we may be thinking toward a collaborative relationship, she actually may need you to take a directive stance. And that's really important to know because you need to take that directive stance to build a good alliance with her and for her to see you as an individual to whom she can come for help, for her to trust you. Somewhat in contrast from a westernized standpoint that might say, oh, we don't want to use the power differential. As a therapist, we want to actually, immediately empower our client. But here again, you may need to start with a directive approach because of her cultural considerations. Additionally, something that's interesting about the power differential, the directive approach, cultural considerations, you don't necessarily want to look at everything in terms of a mind psychological cause because it is traditional in the Chinese culture to consider health holistically. So when your client comes to you, she may present with somatic symptoms. These symptoms of stomachache or headache or insomnia, we can't just go, oh, well, obviously you're stressed out and this is affecting your body. We actually have to get those specific symptoms attention, honor those symptoms, and hear about them. Not everything can come from a psychological guise. Additionally, in working with this client, you're going to go ahead and go through the model, but you have to consider feminist therapy and its contrast to your client, and then how you're going to tailor that to her, which is sort of that theme from chapter 10. So certain analysis and different tools that are offered to us in this article, for example, would be an analysis of gender issues. So how she got to be in that role and what that role means, basically as a woman in her culture and in her society. Also, we're going to look at power analysis. So that gives the client an opportunity to see what forces are enacting upon her. And again, what I like about this is that as you go through this process of discovery with the client, it's also an education for you, the therapist. Also, you kind of understand social location, which is very interesting because it describes that client within her context. Context is a key word in communication here. Chinese culture is termed a high context culture because the communication for it is very complex. And so whereas you and I may speak, and that may be more or less a total communication for us, in this culture you need to pay attention to your client's body language, her eye movements, her tone of voice to get a total communication because her communication is contextual. The authors do a decent job of directing us to applying this model. They actually create a fictionalized client and go through the steps you would go through with her, which again is why it's a wonderful educational tool and I think a good resource for any counselor kind of learning a little bit more about this culture and how to counsel in this culture, or for us as students. The limitations that they talk about is that the model that they've created is insight-based, and that's something to be aware of. So if your client is not inclined towards insight, this would not be appropriate for her. The future is somewhat generic. It talks about comparing to other models or perhaps an empirical review of this model, which is fine but not necessarily adequate. But nonetheless, the presentation that they've created is very excellent. It is well written, it is easily digestible, and I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in counseling that Chinese woman or the Chinese American woman coming from a traditional standpoint and needs to know how to connect with her and assist her in her decision making and therapy. Thank you so much. I look forward to your comments and to responding to them.